You are tuned into this special edition of Future Female Forward. Thanks for joining in. While there is a greater push towards sustainability and green businesses, it is important to recognize the vital role that women play in tackling climate change. Climate change affects everyone, but not equally. What is the role of women in sustainability? How do they contribute? And what are different stakeholders doing to fight this fight towards climate change? We have some amazing women joining us from the field of climate change and sustainability with their perspective and to talk about this important matter. We have with us Ms. Madhulika Sharma, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer at ITC Limited, Aparna Khandelwal, Senior Advisor at India Climate Collaborative, and Kalpana Jain, who is a partner at Deloitte India. Thank you, ladies, so much for joining us. It's so amazing to have an all-female panel here, right? And an important topic as well, women and sustainability. So, Ms. Jain, let me come across to you first up because it's a lot about representation as well, right? What is the current representation when it comes to climate change in women right now? And how important is it for them to have a bigger role?
So, Sonal, thank you for having me here. And to be very honest, we tried to look at representation of women in from this sustainability point of view. And the telling statistic is that there is no statistic that we could get to. All I can say is that we form half the world, and half the world's sustainability, the ability to influence perhaps more than half, given the involvement that women have at grassroots to through the value chain involvement. I think it's very significant without really giving it any numbers. It's very well reflected in in the involvement of women in society, in the economy, in the development of the world, if I can put it that way. Maybe it sounds grand to say that, but it's a fact that the increasing level of involvement of women in various formal fields is possibly also going to have an impact, and we are going to be able to make an inordinate impact in terms of sustainability. Because just to begin with, the sustainability and inclusion necessarily go hand in hand. Women, if there are women involved in decision making, in policy formulation, in implementation, in taking actions, then you're covering, as I said at the start, another half of the world. So I am not able to give you any specific numbers, but we have a long way to go is all I would put it at.
Long way to go. That's been the consensus as well, right? Ms. Sharma, let me come to you because this clamor for sustainability and green transition has just picked up in the last couple of years, right? So while we are almost understanding this field, what do you think is required as far as females' representation here is concerned? And where are we when it comes to corporate India?
So, I'll probably echo what Ms. Kalpana just said, that there could not be a number. But the only fact I'd like to, add to it is that, climate change impact is going to be felt most by the most vulnerable and the weaker section of the society, whether it is, temperature rise, flood, access to water, health and safety, or even food security, right? So the problems associated with it, which is like livelihood, the increasing cost, or even access to places for adaptation kind of a thing, which are like basic necessities, is going to be felt by the society. And women, I think, being again in this society itself, being more on the marginalized thing, are going to be impacted more. Now, when it comes to what is corporate India doing about, I think the realization that climate change, or I think far greater that sustainability, is not a good to do thing, but a very important thing. I think it has taken a core. It is now at the core of any strategy that is being developed by the corporates. And hence, taking cognizance of what is happening, whether it's in the form of regulation or even changing stakeholder expectations, largely driven by investors, but also by the changing customer preferences, right? So I think there's a lot which is happening by corporate India, but the question could be whether it is enough or not. So that I'll leave it at that. But I think there is a lot of action which the corporate India is taking.
Oh, yes, and we keep hearing about that as well, right? The same question to you, Ms. Khandelwal, because you see the impact or you see the action being taken about climate change from a different angle. What has been your take so far from a climate change perspective and representation as well when it comes to women?
Sure. Actually, I'll step back a bit and for the benefit of our audience, actually define what is climate change, right? It is steady increase in temperature and change in weather patterns. And therefore, that means droughts in some places, floods in others, sea level rise, increased diseases, etc. And therefore, it is going to impact the most vulnerable communities, which would be women, children, people living in the coastal areas, people who will be dependent on forests in their livelihoods, etc. And therefore, it should be our effort to ensure that these vulnerable communities are equipped to adapt to the perils of climate change. Honestly, as far as women go, they will not only be impacted the most, but we can flip the equation and look at it from a perspective of making women a part of the solution. We need to provide agency to women to act on climate change. We all know that if the woman is empowered, her entire family is empowered. So I'll pause there.
Yes, so you educate a woman, you educate a society, and similarly, if you empower a woman, you will empower the society as well. That's been the saying, and that's the truth as well. That takes me to the next question, Ms. Jain, for you. We are talking about what is happening right now, but there is a lot of policy intervention that's happening. So when we talk about a policy coming in for climate change, do you think we need to differentiate it from the women's angle or the weaker society or the weaker section of the society, or do you think it will be a policy which will fit all and will be okay for everyone in the society?
So, Sonal, I think as we look at policy formulation, what we need to bear in mind is the impact that sustainability or the lack of sustainability in our practices has on society, and which parts of society it impacts more or impacts less. So as we have just highlighted in the course of the conversation today, that women are inordinately affected and impacted by climate change, by sustainability, by plastics, by the water crisis which is looming. So from that point of view, whenever we are formulating policies, we have to necessarily look at where the impacts are larger and how those can be mitigated. We cannot expect for policies to give us the desired results if we are not including the affected and the impacted parts of society and of the economy. So to my mind, there is no case of building policy without looking at the sections which are more impacted and how they are going to be a part of actually the mitigation plan that one is hoping to achieve through the policy and the plan measures.
Interesting, and point taken. Let's take that forward. I would like to ask you, Ms. Sharma, when formulating a policy at corporate level at ITC, do you think it's important to keep women in mind and different sections in mind when you're just designing it at the corporate level? And also, of course, it impacts the society in some way, whatever actions are taken at the industry level as well. Where do we stand in that case, and what is ITC doing in this regard?
See, ITC I think whether it was before sustainability or climate change came as a part of the conversation, I think more than 3 decades ago, the whole ethos of triple bottom line has been at the heart of designing any business model. And more so now, because I think, as I said, the climate change, well, there's a lot of focus on, I think, decarbonization, even by government and also by large organizations. I think what really needs attention here and what is going to impact a very large, very large section of society is the whole piece on adaptation and the conversation on adaptation. I think to that extent, apart from our strategy, we have actually now started talking about adaptation, and we are working with the stakeholders, which is the farmers, on adoption of regenerative agricultural practices, also doing, climate smart agriculture practices, and also doing some climate risk assessments of our food value chains to help, early mitigation, so that you don't get impacted when it is going to happen, but you actually start working right now, which could be in terms of, looking at alternatives, or it could be in terms of having some practices which will help you avoid that, impact which comes 5 years or 10 years down the line. The other thing is also we are now trying to promote like millet, while Government of India is promoting, but millet is something that ITC is promoting a lot in terms of an alternative, because it's a very drought resistant, very it's good for health, and we are trying to build that as a centerpiece of our whole agri strategy. How do women fit into it? I think women have, at least all in our even our community programs, women have been at the center stage of all the taking leadership in terms of taking forward these actions. So whether we make whatever self-help groups, not only self-help, but also even at a gram level, we try to see that the women are there at the core of decision making. They get empowered, they get educated, so that they also start taking, in the decision making. Because I think women feel more strongly for these than probably men, because I think traditionally women are more socially oriented. So
I would agree with that point, So taking that forward, Ms. Khandelwal, since you also look at the climate finance part of things, when we talk about climate finance, that has been a big talking issue, a big debate there. There is not enough in the world. Developing countries are asking more from developed countries. So we are talking about lesser climate finance. In that picture, do you think when it actually comes through, there'll be more money required just for the impact that this particular phenomenon will have on a particular gender? Is that something which is required in policy making? And what do you expect from this year's COP in that regard? Do we need a different policy making for this?
Right. I think, first of all, India has taken a leadership position on climate action, right, on the global stage. We have set ambitious targets for getting ourselves becoming net zero by 2070. And we've always followed a principle of common but differentiated responsibility. We, of course, need finance not just for climate mitigation, which is helping reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, but also adaptation, right? Where we can help the vulnerable communities deal with the impact of climate change. We need something like $2.5 trillion just to meet some of our, global targets. Now, that from multiple sources is going to be difficult to come. Everyone has to pitch in, and it's a global problem. And apart from, the multilaterals, bilaterals, the private capital that will come in, a key stakeholder which can play a small but catalytic role would be the philanthropies. And we feel India is poised to be at this global stage, present a unified voice at COP, not just with the government, but also with Indian business leaders, Indian philanthropic leaders, especially focused on climate change, where we'll be able to bridge this gap. It's a huge funding gap which exists. We need to be innovative in our financing mechanisms. We need to see how we can use grant capital more effectively, more catalytically. How can we de-risk some of the interventions? A lot of climate solutions are difficult to fund because they are new. Nobody knows how they'll perform. And therefore, we need to find innovative ways to ensure that we get financing from all possible sources. It's a global problem, and we need to realize, and the world needs to realize, that everyone needs to pitch in to help us solve this.
Ms. Khandelwal, just to follow up on that, while we are talking about climate finance being a global problem, I speak to a lot of entrepreneurs who are working in the climate change field, right? Do you think for them to get finance versus another gender is a bigger problem as well, if they are going and asking someone for finance to do something which is related to climate change? Do you think that's an issue right now?
Absolutely, because like I said, climate projects, climate solutions are a bit risky or perceived to be risky. And therefore, like I mentioned, grant capital is a good medium to help reduce that risk. They can prove their business models, prove their technologies, and then be ready to go to the market and access finance, because they would have ticked some of the boxes which traditional finance requires them to tick.
Okay, take that point. Ladies, it is an interesting conversation. We'll continue it. What could the impact be? What are the policies that are needed? And greenwashing, that also becomes a big issue. We'll continue all that and a lot more after this very short break. Stay tuned for that.